Hi, I'm Susan Beck.
And I'm Kay Hickman.
And we're here today to work on our This and That embellishment sampler.
We named it the This and That embellishment sampler because it is a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
It's 13 fun techniques that you can use on different projects, and today we're going to look at a technique that I call random patchwork, the easiest patchwork you'll ever do. On our embellishment sampler, we've used it as a block to create a background for a few button embellishments. Now first you need a foundation, and what we used for our foundation was cutaway fusion fleece. It's a lightweight fusible fleece, and it makes a perfect foundation for this technique. First you'll cut a piece of fusion fleece, and you'll just make this the size you need for your project. And then you're going to layer pieces of fabric on top of it. This is a great way to use your scraps that you have in your sewing room.
I certainly have a few of those.
And I took pinking shears and I cut out squares and rectangles and put them on top of the fusion fleece. And then the next thing I did was take it to the iron and fuse them down. So I now have them lightly fused to the foundation. I'm going to add a few more on top of this.
You could secure those down with a little bit of spray or an adhesive stick if you would like to.
You can do that, because what we're going to do now is stitch across this fabric and hold everything in place with stitches. And I'm using open embroidery foot number 20, and I'm doing that just because it gives me great visibility and I can see where I'm going. And the first few lines of stitching, I want to carefully go across as many pieces as I can so that I will hold them in place. And there's no right or wrong way to stitch. I just go from one side to the other, and I started with a straight stitch. When I get to the edge, I'm simply going to pivot and go back across. Now I'm going to use a variety of stitches. I'm just starting with a straight stitch, but you really can use any type of stitch you want to. I typically pick open decorative stitches or open stitches because they sew quicker, they're faster, and you're going to end up sewing a lot of stitches on this.
I notice you're using variegated threads on your sampler today.
I am, and it really just does a nice job of blending some of the colors with the fabric, but you could use any type of thread, even if you have leftover thread to go with your leftover fabric, because what happens is the stitches become the star of the patchwork, and they will, as long as they show, then that is all that matters. Now I've changed to the feather stitch. I use really simple stitches like zigzag, straight stitch, triple straight stitch, and I also use a stiletto or tool to hold the fabric down, especially near the edges, until I get them stitched in place, because there are a lot of edges here that I don't want to pucker or to flip.
This would be a good time to use all of those decorative stitches on your machine.
You know, it's a great technique for that. It's also a really good technique to get comfortable with your machine. If you have a new machine and you just want to sew, this is a great way just to learn where everything is and to figure out what you have on the machine. It's hard to know exactly when to stop, but you want to stitch until it's covered with stitches, and you'll start to notice that the fabrics start blending together and start melding together, and that's what the stitches do for it. The more you stitch them, the flatter it becomes, and it takes on the look of one piece of fabric. Let's look at how we used it on the sampler. You can see the different stitches I used and how many stitches. So this takes a few minutes to do, but it just really is very simple.
I like how you embellish with the buttons also, Susan.
I think that's part of the fun part. When you get to the end of this embellishment sampler, you start adding little trinkets and buttons. We have another example of the random patchwork that is very similar, but I did two things differently. One is I cut random shapes. There are triangles, squares, rectangles. Then the other thing I did is I used one color thread. It wasn't variegated, and it was a high contrast to the background. So you can easily see all the stitches I did on the surface there.
It's almost as if you created a whole new fabric.
It really is. It takes on a whole new look, and you really do have something that looks very different from what you started with. For more information on using decorative stitches and Bernina presser feet, visit your local Bernina dealer today.